Welcome to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I'm your host, Darrell Scott, and together we will dive into the lives and careers of the jazz legends who have left a rhythmic imprint on the world. Be prepared to reminisce on the highs and the lows of their musical journey and the trials that sculpted their timeless musical gems. We'll preserve the legacy of these extraordinary maestros and find inspiration in the melodies of their lives. Subscribe now and never miss a beat. Now, let's get to the show. Hi there, this is Darrell Scott. You are watching the Jazz Flyte Podcast, and I want to say if you go to the Tri-C Jazz Fest website and you look up legends, I got one on today's show. His name, Joe Hunter. Joe, welcome to the Jazz Flyte Podcast.
Great to be here with you, Darrell.
All right, sir. Let's figure out this in the beginning. How did your jazz journey begin?
Well, let's see. I was first I went to Cleveland Heights High. And I first started taking piano lessons with a woman named Judy Strauss, who was a local jazz pianist. My parents had heard her play in a club and approached her about teaching. And so I started taking lessons with her in the late 60s. And, she introduced me to the concept of playing chords and harmony. But then in high school, I started studying with a guy named Bill Gidney, who was a renowned jazz pianist in Cleveland. He used to play at Nighttown all the time. He played at the Boarding House. You remember that club on Euclid?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so then we had a band in high school, and we started playing. We did shows into Tiger's Den, and we did some coffee houses around Cleveland Heights. And then about 79, we started playing at a place called the Coach House, which later became Club Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
You may remember that on... Yeah. I can't remember the name of that street. You remember what was the name of that street? Abington.
Yeah.
Abington.
Yes.
And so I started, just immediately started playing. I went to Cleveland State, and I went there for a few years, and then dropped out of college and just started playing jobs, really, and got one of my early commercial jobs with a guy named. What was his name? Gerald Baxter. Gerald Baxter. He was the drummer with the OJs.
Mm-hmm.
He had what we in those days we called a lounge band. You remember, you play
Right.
all the Harley hotels and the Holiday Inns and such.
Right.
And he took me down to Prospect and bought me my first polyester tuxedo, and we started working and just started doing that. So that's how I really started going. I just started playing gigs almost immediately.
So let me ask you this. You started going to clubs while in high school. How'd you get in? You weren't old enough.
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to clubs per se.
Mm-hmm.
We played in some of the clubs. I mean, really, by the time I was 21 and I could go to the Boarding House,
right.
That's when I would say my real education began in terms of hearing some of the local greats. And they had a huge impact on me, going to the Boarding House and listening to Ace Carter and Lamar Gaines,
Mm-hmm.
and Jacktown and Weasel Parker, and then Neil Creaky and of course Bill Gidney, and really hanging out and listening to these older masters.
So while you're sitting there listening to these folks, what did you gather from them that you still use today or that you use?
Let's see. Swinging, making that music feel good. Because when they played, it just felt so good. They were swinging so hard, and that which is, of course, engages an audience, and to be able to witness that and be part of that audience that's getting so moved by this music that was just so joyous. That had a huge impact on me. The other thing would be, it laid the roots of my interest in the Great American Songbook, and classic tunes and classic songs. So that's a pretty big impact on me.
So from the Great American Songbook, did you pick favorites? Was there something that stuck out that made you just want to go and get more involved with that?
It's later down the road in
Okay.
terms of my career. It was not till I was really in my late 30s that my profound interest in it developed. Prior to that, the generation I grew up in, I was very much involved in what we called fusion. So that was my early thing. It wasn't about the American Songbook when I started. I was
Right.
playing a Fender Rhodes. I had a synthesizer. I was playing with funk bands. I was playing in some reggae bands. I played in rock bands. And played a lot of fusion. Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, Joe Sample. These kind of things were really where my head was at. In my early days.
I have an oddball question, and it's just based upon me. Is there really a difference between a piano and a keyboard? I know one is acoustic, we'll say, and the other one is electric. But is there a different feel, different sound? What can you tell me
Well,
about
the
the
first
difference
thing,
between the two?
well, it's a good question. One of the fundamental differences is when you're playing an acoustic piano, like I'm sitting at right now. You're moving air. Strings are vibrating. When you depress a key, strings are being hit, and air is moving. Things are vibrating, and you feel that underneath your fingers. And you have such a wider range of expression. Now, of course, when you're playing an electric piano, you're playing a speaker. Now, with that said, in my lifetime, man, the technology has changed so dramatically and has gotten so much better. There was no, digital sampled electric keyboards when you started. They were terrible.
Right.
The DX7, and they had the feel was no good, and the range of expression wasn't that good. But it kept getting better and better and better. And one of the great things, I'm happy to say, they all got much lighter. I remember
Okay.
in the old days when I was, I had to carry a dolly to carry around my MIDI controller, and all the equipment that was involved in that. But really, when it really comes right down to it, it's just that feeling of you feel the sound being created underneath your fingers, and you have a much, much wider range of expression.
Going back a bit, while you were in college, I believe they sent you to Rio de Janeiro.
Well, what happened was Cleveland State established a relationship with a university in Rio de Janeiro. University de Gama Filho was called. And first, about 15 or 20 Brazilians arrived in Cleveland, and one of them lived in my house with my parents.
Okay.
And so I became very much involved in the Brazilian music and culture and Portuguese, because we were all hanging out together, going to Cleveland State. And so I started listening to a lot of Brazilian music, started taking Portuguese classes at Cleveland State, and just I'd always wanted to travel more. And so I decided I'm going to do that. So I went down in January of 1982. I arrived there. I was the only one. So they sent 20 Brazilians up here, and Cleveland State sent me.
One.
So
Okay.
I went down to Rio, and I was there for 7 months. So from January to July of 1982, I spent, and got really, really turned on to Brazilian music and culture, and that love has, stayed with me to this day.
While there, you're taking classes, but you have downtime. So what's the experience like of being in Rio?
Well, let's see. It's a phenomenally beautiful city.
Right?
Just really one of the treasures. It's amazing. Mountains and ocean, and so went to the beach a lot. Went out to some nightclubs. There were some very, would go down to like the hotel down in Copacabana and introduce myself to the piano trio down there and start to meet players there. I was involved in a sort of a cultural dance group down there. So I was, do some rehearsing with them, and listen to the radio a lot, recorded stuff off the radio. Yeah, I don't know, just whatever I could,
Had some fun and played some music.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Brazilian music. It's a bunch of different things. All this time, who's influencing you? What keyboardist, pianist are you paying attention to that are, we'll say, affecting your playing?
Well, at that period of time, of course, Herbie Hancock was huge for me. McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, we just lost him, was about a year or so ago.
Right.
He had a huge impact on me when I was first starting out and experimenting with this notion of improvisation and really being in the moment and listening and interacting with other players, and then also the excitement of creating exciting solos. Herbie always knocked me out. Keith Jarrett, because he was releasing some of the solo piano records, the Clone Concert, and I was influenced by that. From the household that I grew up in, my original influences were, because I grew up in a house where there was a fabulous jazz collection. And as I grew and my ears grew and my knowledge grew, all these records were right there in the house, that kind of spanned the history of the music. So just in the house that I was growing up in, I listened to a lot of Ramsey Lewis, the early Ramsey Lewis Trio, loved that. My parents were huge Ray Charles fans. So we listened to a lot of the Atlantic Records stuff on Ray Charles. But there was Miles Davis, there was Ornette Coleman records in the house. There was, Dizzy Gillespie, Duke Ellington. My father was crazy about Benny Goodman and some of the swing stuff that I later became very much connected with. So just from a very early age, there was a lot of music in the house. And my parents would have parties and they would hire a piano player. So there was live music in the house. My father played really good washtub bass, believe it or not. And he could really swing on that thing. And so there was a lot of live music. When my parents had parties at the house, there was dancing. And so I got to grow up in a household where I saw that joyous component that jazz has.
When you mentioned earlier about the feeling you have while you're playing, and you I don't want to say get the audience involved, but you feel the audience. Can you describe how that happens, or is it just a vibe that you get?
That's a good question. Let me see. I think it's something that you initially when you play a club, for instance, and people start dancing, that's a real tangible thing. That's very tangible. And it's wonderful. And you're like, you're on the right track. You're doing something correct. When you're at a club and people respond physically to it, literally get up and start moving and dancing to it.
Right.
That's a very obvious one. As I've grown up and had the wonderful opportunity to play a lot of concerts, and then it gets a little bit deeper in a way, because you're harnessing, when you have a lot of people focusing their attention on you, that's energy coming towards the stage. So you're together playing as an ensemble, and you're putting something out, But when you're playing in a concert situation and you have people's attention, that attention is a form of energy, and it's coming towards the stage. And as you get more experienced in this, in some sort of way, you're able to harness that, that energy that you feel coming towards you. Just the notion of people, human beings, paying attention is a powerful thing, to
Right,
experience.
right.
And you get kind of hooked on it, man. It's
Okay. That's always interesting because there's some people you see, no names, that you can tell are, I don't want to say going through the motions, but they're playing because they're so technically correct. But then there
well,
are
I
times,
suppose it's a thin line. It's a thin line between feeling, absorbing energy, and responding to it, because you don't want to be pandering, right? You're
right.
not playing silliness so to elicit a specific response. You know what I mean? So it's a thin, it's a
Right.
tricky line there.
You've spent a great deal of time at the Tri-C Jazz Fest in many different roles. How did you and the Tri-C Jazz Fest get together?
Well, so I moved to Columbus, Ohio in 1987, and was down there for 10 years. And while I was there, I got involved in teaching. I got a job at Capital University in their Conservatory of Music.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 1992. So I did that for 5 years. And then I moved back to Cleveland after my father passed in the late 90s. And I was very fortunate because I had started doing some work with Ernie Krivda, who was teaching at Tri-C. And because of Ernie, he got me a job. I moved right back into Cleveland and immediately got a job. Steve Enos, who runs the department, hired me to be the jazz piano instructor at the Tri-C Jazz Studies program. So was 97 when I came back, and I was just very, very lucky to come back into town and slide right into a great job in a program that I just felt so strongly about. It's a great program down there at Tri-C. I loved it because it felt more like a jazz vocational school. It was a two-year degree, and it was all about fundamentals, swinging, the rhythm, blues, the American song. And we had fabulous students coming out of that program. Of course, one of the most prominent ones is Dominic Farinacci,
Right.
who's doing a lot of work there himself.
So then after all of that, they induct you into this legends category. That's pretty impressive, sir.
Well, I was honored. Believe me, I was very honored to receive that. It was very prestigious. I was very, very proud of that.
Did you feel additional pressure, or were you just being you?
Just being me, I guess. I mean, what do you mean additional pressure from?
Well, all of a sudden, people get an award and they feel like they have to go out and do more, be more. And then there are some people who go, I got this by being me. I'm going to continue to be me.
I think I would fall into the latter. Yeah, I think I was more, yes, I was just continuing to be what I am. I'll tell you one of the funniest things I ever heard, Darrell. This friend of mine, it was the year I received the award. I was downtown at the festival, getting ready to go on, and I ran into my friend. He says, "So I understand you're a jazz legend now." I said, "Yes, I was really honored." He goes, "Well, wait a minute. Isn't a legend like, the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or something?" Everyone's heard about it, but nobody's actually seen him. We heard he can play. Oh my goodness. I thought that was the best deconstructionist,
That is very good. And don't get me wrong, I might have to steal that and use that on my own. One of the things that has impressed me about you, and you've had the opportunity, you're going to know who I'm talking about, but there's a man who was related to the Tri-C Jazz Fest who's produced albums by Al Jarreau, George Benson, Miles Davis, David Sanborn, just to name a few. Tommy LiPuma. I was in radio when it was in his heyday, and so I just saw the name. But you've had an experience with him. to be close to him. Tell me about Tommy. Let's just do it that way.
Well, I'll tell you a story, and I told this. I actually told the story on if you go to Tri-C, they're on their website. They had a series of interviews with various people who were impacted by Tommy. They had
Right.
his bobblehead. You ever seen any of those interviews?
Yes, I've seen. Yes,
The bobblehead interviews.
the bobblehead is great.
It's great. So just to summarize basically what I was talking about, Darrell, when we were coming up, when George Benson's record "Breezin'" came
Yeah.
out,
Yep.
it was so huge. It was such a smash record, and we loved it. Listened to it all the time. We started transcribing the songs off the record, and playing "Affirmation" and these other great songs from that. And that's the first time I saw his name. I had no idea that he had any kind of Cleveland connection, right?
Right.
So, and then you start seeing that name all over the place, and realize, wow, this guy's really, really, really huge. So then you fast forward to the early 2000s. There was a swing revival in America. If you remember this, there was a real nouveau swing revival. And I was in a very good band in Cleveland, Ohio called the Dukes of Whale. And the drummer in that band was a guy named Tommy Edwards. He was a wonderful drummer. And Tommy was a very good friend of Tommy LiPuma's in the 1950s. They were young men in their 20s, playing at the Roxy for the strippers, playing jazz gigs, hanging out, and getting into all kinds of
trouble.
Fun. You're
fun.
going to do when you're a young man in your 20s playing music in clubs. And so when Tommy started coming back into town and getting involved in Tri-C and the program, and which was just so incredible, I was able to reconnect the two of them. And that was a really neat thing, because they were very old pals. They hadn't seen each other for years and years and years. So that was really exciting to be able to reconnect with them. And so one of my favorite stories, and now, of course, I'm just honored, now Tommy LiPuma knows who I am. I can walk into a room, he's going to go, "Hey, Joe, how you doing?" I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this is just incredible." So I was at the studio down at the school, in the new building, the Tommy LiPuma building, which is state of the art recording studio was built there. And so I was recording some rhythm tracks for a vocal jazz group. Now, if you know anything about Tommy, when he records, he doesn't sit in the booth, with the engineer, like where most producers would be. He sits in the room with the musicians.
Nice.
So he's in the room, and we're cutting tracks. And he's sitting right next to me, sort of between the bass player and the drummer, and we're between takes or something. And Tommy looks over at me and says, "So, Joe, did Tommy ever tell you any of the things we got into, some of our adventures back in the 50s?" And I said, "Yeah, man, he sure did." And he just smiled, this great big smile. And that was really, I'm sorry to say we've lost both of those men.
There was an aura, like I said, I never sat down and talked to him, but when you go through this vast catalog that he touched, it's like, what didn't he do? Who didn't he work with? What genre did he not have an effect on? From Miles Davis to their pop stars on there, there's rock, and it's just like, he's one of those guys you wanted, and a lot of us did not have the opportunity to sit down and talk to him and just kind of pick his brain, just to go, how do you do this? What goes on? And the relationships he had with all of these people.
I wish I'd had the opportunity to have that same conversation with him. I would just been so many things. One time I did have an opportunity. He was doing, this was again in early days when he started coming around,
Mm-hmm.
and developing this relationship. Terry Pond Tremley was really
Right.
developing this friendship, this
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and Dr. Thornton, and they were, this friendship and the relationship was developing with him. So he was coming into town a lot. So one day he was doing sort of a Q&A with a bunch of the music students down at the school. And I said, Tommy, I've always wanted to ask you something about, because you produced one of the greatest albums I think ever, and it's a desert island record for me. It's in the top 25 albums ever for me, and it was called Amazona. I think it was João Gilberto. João Gilberto, the great Brazilian singer guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy produced this record. And it's phenomenal. Klaus Ogerman did all the arrangements, the orchestrations. And I said, could you tell us anything about, what was it like, to work with him? And he told some great stories about how they had to track, and how the rhythm section guys were having a hard time following João Gilberto's guitar comp. So they had to have Grady Tate come in with like a rolled up magazine and sit next to him and kind of create a click track that then they could put all the other instruments on top of.
Oh, okay.
Because they needed somebody who could really like lock into it. And then interestingly enough, it was like right after that time that he answered that question for me. This Diana Krall record came out where he revived some of those Klaus Ogerman arrangements. It's wonderful, it's marvelous. I mean, it's the same orchestrations that were on the João Gilberto record. He then reutilized with Klaus on the Diana Krall record.
In this answer, you mentioned it's a desert island record. Let's put you on that desert island. I'm gonna give you 5. I'm gonna make it tough on you.
That's 5.
I can't give you 100. We'd be here for 3.5 years. But if you could just mention, because the thing I also like to do is I like to let our listeners know that this is what these guys listen to. These are classics. You need to somehow go out and get them. So if I said, Joe, just give me 5 of things that you think that people don't know about, that don't listen to that they need to listen to.
Oh, that's such a daunting question. I mean, it's so vast, and I really, it's so vast, and because how I would respond would have to do with who was I talking to. If I was talking to a young person and was, hey, Joe, what should I be listening to? Well, I might do that. But if I was to talk about the things that are like, I really, really, really,
right,
really
exactly,
love,
right,
that I need for food for my spirit, that I would need, that's what I'm talking about. Not, so what would it be?
Okay.
I don't know. There's so many.
Give me one quickly off the top of your head.
There's a great Oscar Peterson record called A Portrait of Frank Sinatra. I love that record. I keep going back to it for inspiration all the time. Love it. I would Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg variations. I would certainly want that. A fabulous compilation on Columbia called Body and Soul by Errol Garner.
Okay.
Wonderful guy. I would need to have that around. This record, Amazona, that I just mentioned, I would have to have that. Or actually, I wouldn't go with that one. I would probably go with this. There's a compilation, I think it was on Pacific Jazz, of João Gilberto's first 2 records. And these records were all arranged by the great Antonio Carlos Jobim. Jobim was, he's sort of his musical director and one of the great maestros,
right,
as we all know. That one it's the mother lode of all the great bossa nova songs. They're all there. It's like 35 tracks on this record. It's just wonderful. Probably would have to have something by Ella Fitzgerald. Maybe one of have to have.
Right.
have to think about it a little bit longer, but it has to have some Ella in there. And I would probably, definitely have to have a Ray Charles box set, of the Atlantic years. I'd probably want that.
Nice.
And then, maybe there's some more obscure. There's one of my favorite American rock bands I'm a huge fan of is called NRBQ, the New Rhythm and Blues Quartet. And they've been making amazing records for the last 50 years, something like that. And I'm a huge fan of theirs. Okay,
I don't want to tax your brain too much. I don't want, because like I said,
maybe maybe it got to have a Miles record in there. Maybe something my Prince will come. Some Miles thing that had. I would probably go for a Miles record that had Wynton Kelly on piano. And as much as I love Red Garland, I love Herbie Hancock, I love Victor Feldman, but I would probably want one of the Miles records that had Wynton Kelly, because he's so close to my heart.
So what you've done is you've given our audience things to go out and find and things to go out and listen to, and I appreciate that. So currently where you stand, what's left for you?
Well, I've retired from teaching, right before COVID. Yeah,
okay.
Man, I retired. Yeah, I did about 25 years down at Tri-C. And so now I'm sort of back to my original life, Darrell. I'm playing gigs.
Nice.
And of course, I'm an older dude now, so my phone rings. I have a nice reputation, and I'm very, very happy to say that I'm working as much as I want to work. It's great. And I play with all good players, and I don't really have to go out there and pound the pavement. My phone rings, as I said. And I get to do some, there's still fun concerts. I'm sorry to say, there's really no more reason to make any more records. So I don't have any intention on, I've put out 3 records. Dallas and Coffee and I made a couple records together. And then I just did my last record, which was about 2013 or 14, that Jim Wadsworth produced, from the guy who used to book Nighttown all the time.
Mm-hmm, right.
And I made that, but you know how it is now. I can't see any reason to put out a CD anymore. So I'm lucky. When we did put ours out, they were very popular, and we sold a few thousand copies. We actually made some money.
So I can't pick up a copy of anything recent, but you're playing. How can I find out where you're playing? Do you have a schedule? Do you have a website?
Well, I have Facebook is probably the best bet.
Okay.
And I always tell people now, at some point I thought I would have like a separate Facebook page, kind of what they call it, a fan page or something like that.
Right.
So there, if you go to Facebook, there's a Joe Hunter Jazz. Don't go to that. I never just go to my personal Facebook page, just Joe Hunter. It's pretty obvious. You'll see a picture of me sitting at a piano. And I do try to, I share and publicize the things, particularly if they're concerts. When I'm playing something really fun at the Bop Stop,
mm-hmm.
Of course, that wonderful venue. You think, if they're shows, but other than that, some of the solo piano things, like when I play solo piano at Pier W, or I play solo piano at the Hyde Park. We've been doing a lot of work at this place in Shaker now called North Star, part of that whole new Van Aken.
Oh, yes.
Van Aken.
I've been there.
They're doing jazz Fridays and Saturday nights, and I'm there a lot. So that
All
I
right.
do try to. I publicize that.
I wonder. That was a Saturday. I didn't pay attention to the players. We set out. If you set up in that corner, there's
right by the outdoor patio.
Right by the outdoor patio. I was sitting out there with a bunch of folks, and there was a
jazz
band.
Well have been me.
It was a jazz band playing. These are those things you go, if I really would have paid attention. Like the other thing was, there was another friend of mine, and I don't know if you know him, Sam Hooper, was playing out on the lawn.
Around the corner.
Right.
In the
yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I saw it after the fact. All right. I will see you somewhere, probably there at that place.
Went down to the dance. Sat couples danced fine.
Joe, this has been fun. I greatly appreciate the knowledge that you have given us and the different things. But before I go, I do tell the name of the last album that you did so people can know what it is.
It's called Sweet and Lovely, and it was a fun project. So it's a piano trio with some of the tracks have a string quartet, which was kind of fun to do that. And we recorded that down at in Oberlin when they built this. Oberlin built how many years ago? 10 years ago, a beautiful new facility. And I'm very proud to say that record was recorded and mixed by a guy named Michael Bishop, really wonderful local producer and engineer, who tragically we lost about 3 or 4 years ago. And but this guy, when I went to his house, Darrell, to mix my record, I'm sitting in his studio upstairs, and I said, "Michael, what is that, Darrell? What is that? What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's a Grammy. It's a Grammy. I said, "Man, how many you got, man?" He says, there's like 7 Grammys around the room.
Wow.
Did a lot of work. He recorded a bunch of stuff for the Cleveland Orchestra, and he was with Telarc. He got several Grammys there. He did some work with, remember that Japanese piano player, Hiromi?
Yeah,
Ever heard of her?
So.
Hiromi, real virtuosic piano player.
Right.
He did some stuff with her, Eric Bibbs. And so, I was just so I love the sound of the record. It's beautifully recorded and mixed. And it was such an honor to work with a guy of his stature.
I'm going to say this, and I mean this from my heart. You seem so humble. You know what I mean? It's like you've done a myriad of impressive things, but you're not bodacious about it. You're not braggadocious about it. It's just you. I've enjoyed the time that you and I have spent together. I have, as I say, have learned things. I will get up to North Star and see you. I greatly appreciate it.
Wow.
I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. You know what I said when I was, because I do feel incredibly lucky. When I turned 50, there was a very nice birthday party for me. And I sort of stood up in front of my friends. I said, you know what? I pulled it off, man. I stayed in the game. I don't know how. I was lucky. I was so lucky. I got to stay in the game. I don't know how I did it. I didn't have any plan. I got to tell you, man, I was flying by the seat of my pants for a long time. And I was very lucky to have got teaching, got into that and to play with all these wonderful players that I played with. I was like, how lucky is this? I
Right.
actually I always wanted to play music. And I got to do that for 45 years.
Very, very good. I greatly appreciate this time. I've enjoyed this, and I'm sure our listeners have too. And let me tell the listeners, as always, if you want to reach out to me, you can send an email to jazzflyte@gmail.com. Again, that's jazzflyte@gmail.com. Joe, once again, thank you. Appreciate the time. To the listeners, we will talk to you next week on the Jazz Flyte Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I hope you enjoy these stories and soulful melodies that grew through the doors of time. If you want to stay connected with the latest updates and episodes, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Until next time, I'm Darrell Scott.